In this lecture, we'll discuss the problem of evil, the main question of which is, why does God allow pain and suffering? So we'll go over some preliminary considerations and make some distinctions. Then we'll talk about the logical problem of evil. For the next lecture, we will talk about the evidential problem of evil, the next video. So the main question, if God is good, why is there evil and suffering in the world? Look around. Disease, famine, war, murder, etc. Why does God allow this if God is so good? The answer, according to the proponent of the problem of evil, is that God doesn't exist. Or if they want to be a bit more conservative in their claims, they can say, well, it's likely that God doesn't exist. A third route they can go is to say that God is not the way we supposed him to be, like he's not good or he's not powerful, something like that. And it's a posteriori because it starts with the empirical observation that evil exists. An initial distinction is between the psychological problem of evil and the philosophical problem of evil. Psychological problem of evil is sort of psychological struggle to make peace with God or trust God in light of the evil in the world, whereas the philosophical problem is an attempt to show that God doesn't exist based on the existence of evil. It's a logical issue. It's an argument, whereas a psychological problem is sort of angsty kind of psychological issue. So if you solve the philosophical problem of evil, it doesn't mean you solve the psychological problem of evil. You might still struggle with the existence of evil in the world. And then there's a distinction between the moral problem, between moral evil and natural evil. Moral evil is evil that results from the free choices of persons. So in this painting here, we have Cain killing Abel. That would be an example of moral evil. And then natural evil would be any other evil, evil that's not due to the free choice of persons. So, for example, famine, disease, hurricanes, etc. Let's look at the logical problem of evil. The claim is that it's logically impossible for both God and evil to exist. It's like saying there are square triangles or married bachelors. To claim that there can be square triangles would be a contradiction. And in the same way, according to the logical problem of evil, to claim that both God and evil exists involves some sort of contradiction. Epicurus put the idea, is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is not omnipotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both willing and able? Then whence cometh evil? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God? And I believe that quote is from David Hume's Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion, and he attributed it to Epicurus. The logical problem of evil is based on an argument form called reductio ad absurdum. And this is a perfectly legitimate way of reasoning. What you do is that you assume that a view is true in order to show that it's false. You prove that a view is false by showing that it leads to a contradiction, and the process is as follows. You assume that it's true, show that it leads to a contradiction, and therefore you can conclude that it's false. Because anything that leads to a contradiction cannot itself be true. So here's the argument. Premise 1, God exists. This is our assumption for reductio. Premise 2, if God exists, then God is omnipotent, omniscient, and morally perfect. This is by a particular definition of God. In fact, the very conception of God that from which the problem arises. So omnipotence is all power. To be omnipotent is to be all powerful. To be omniscient is to be all knowing. So from 1 and 2, it follows by an argument form called modus ponens that God is omnipotent, omniscient, and morally perfect. So far, so good. Number 4, if God is omnipotent, omniscient, and morally perfect, then God has the power to eliminate all evil. God knows when evil exists and how to prevent it, and God always eliminates as much evil as he can. Now, I got these implications from J.L. Mackey's Evil and Omnipotence. He wrote a classic article in philosophy called Evil and Omnipotence, in that article, he discusses the logical problem of evil. So when I say God has the power to eliminate all evil, and when I say God always eliminates as much evil as he can, I'm getting that from J.L. Mackie. I added in omniscience, from which it's entailed that God knows that when evil exists and how to prevent it. Further, God has the power to eliminate all evil. God knows when evil exists and how to prevent it, and God always eliminates as much evil as he can. This follows from 3 and 4 by modus ponens. 5, 6, If God has the power to eliminate all evil, God knows when evil exists and how to prevent it, and God always eliminates as much evil as he can, then evil doesn't exist. This is an assumption, but it seems reasonable. Why? Well, if God can eliminate evil, he knows how to, knows where it is, and he, because of his moral perfection, he will always eliminate evil. Well, then he would eliminate evil. But it does exist, according to 7. 8, evil does exist. And that contradicts 7, which says that evil does not exist, which we get from 5 and 6 through modus ponens. Since 7 and 8 contradict each other, we can conclude that God doesn't exist. And you see that in 9, which is the conclusion. So let's consider some objections to the argument. How might you respond? Well, we need to note that the logical problem of evil is based on the claim that the following 4 claims lead to a contradiction. God is omniscient, God is omnipotent, God is morally perfect, and evil exists. If we deny any one of these, the inconsistency goes away. So we could deny God's power or knowledge or moral perfection, or we could deny that evil exists altogether. The problem with this is that there are many in the world who would not want to deny any of these 4 claims. Jews, Christians, and Muslims would not want to deny that God is omnipotent or omniscient or morally perfect, and they would not want to deny that evil exists. And so these objections aren't open to them, and they still have a problem. The argument is a problem for them. Another way of responding is via Manichaean Dualism. This is the claim that the universe is a product of an ongoing battle between 2 co-equal and co-eternal first principles like good and evil. So you've got the good side, the bad side, they're constantly fighting. And the history of humanity is a struggle. The outcome or the outplaying of the struggle between these 2 first principles. This is from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, the article, The Concept of Evil. Now, this is fine as it goes. Logically, it gets around the problem, but it's just another way of denying God's omnipotence. So, can we say that it's logically possible for God to exist and be omnipotent, omniscient, and morally perfect, and for evil to exist? Does that necessarily involve a logical contradiction? No, it doesn't. And here's where objection 6 comes in. Objection 6 I call the morally justifying reasons objection. It's possible for God to have a justifying reason, that is, a morally sufficient reason for permitting certain evil. Therefore, it's not necessarily true that God always eliminates as much evil as he can. So if God has a justifying reason for permitting a certain evil, then he can permit that evil while remaining morally blameless in the situation. And what is it for God to have a justifying reason for permitting some evil? I get this definition from William Rowe. God would have a justifying reason for permitting some horrendous evil or just some evil or other if he would not be able to prevent that evil without forfeiting some good that outweighs the evil or permitting some equal or worse evil. So, for example, we could think of it in terms of humanity. So if I take my kids on a bike ride, I have some idea that they might fall off their bikes and get hurt. And I think I'm perfectly justified. I have a justifying reason for taking them on bike rides, even though I know there's a chance, maybe even a good chance, that they would get hurt. Why? Well, I'm not trying to coddle them. I'm not trying to be a helicopter dad. I'm trying to allow them to mature as individuals, develop their individuality, and become virtuous human beings. Part of that is to allow them the freedom to, say, ride their bikes, even though I know that there's a chance that they're going to get hurt. So in that situation, when I let them ride their bikes, I'm sort of blameless when they scrape their knee because I have a justifying reason for permitting the possibility of evil in that case. So this objection that if God has a morally justifying reason for permitting some evil, then he isn't he isn't blameworthy for allowing the evil. It is a rejection of the claim in premise 4 that if God is omnipotent, omniscient, and morally perfect, he always eliminates as much evil as he can. So, as I said, humans can have a morally sufficient reason for allowing evil. The suffering of vaccination for the protection of from disease, or the evils of war for the protection of the oppressed, as in the Civil War. But it seems that God can too. For example, if God wanted to create a world where courage and compassion were possible, he can't do that unless he allows suffering in that world. You can't show courage unless you take a risk, and there can't be a risk if there's no chance of some non-ideal sort of state of affairs coming about, right? For example, some suffering. And compassion, you can't show compassion on someone who has an ideal situation. You can only show compassion on someone who is in a non-ideal situation. Maybe they're suffering, maybe they don't have enough food. So if God wanted to create creatures who are capable of developing the virtues of courage and compassion, he would have to create a world where people were capable of suffering and where there was adversity. Also, if God wanted to allow the persistence of an unfulfilled desire in order to bring about the satisfaction of that persisting desire, he might be justified. So, for example, a person might go through quite a bit of pain to get through college, but once they graduate and get the job, they feel the satisfaction of working through it, of persevering. But you can't have that sort of desire, that persisting desire, met unless it, for some time, goes unmet. You can't have one without the other. And finally, allowing the evils that are made possible by human free will. And this is some justifying reason that Alvin Plantinga talks about in his book, God, Freedom, and Evil. His article, God, Freedom, and Evil. So if God wants to allow an evil by granting humans free will, if God grants humans free will, he can't do that and at the same time guarantee that they never abuse it, because if he guarantees that they don't abuse it, then they never had free will in the first place. Here's what Plantinga says from God, Freedom, and Evil. A world containing creatures who are significantly free and freely perform more good than evil actions is more valuable, all else being equal, than a world containing no free creatures at all. Now, God can create free creatures, but he can't cause or determine them to do only what is right. For if he does so, then they aren't significantly free after all. They do not do what is right freely. To create creatures capable of moral good, therefore, he must create creatures capable of moral evil. And he can't give these creatures the freedom to perform evil and at the same time prevent them from doing so. As it turned out, sadly enough, some of the free creatures God created went wrong in the exercise of their freedom. This is the source of moral evil. The fact that free creatures sometimes go wrong, however, counts neither against God's omnipotence nor against his goodness, for he could have forestalled the occurrence of moral evil only by removing the possibility of moral good. Right, so God can't grant free will and then guarantee that people don't abuse it. But what if God saw that the granting of free will was justified, even in light of the suffering that would result from it? In sum, on the logical problem of evil, J.L. Mackie in Evil and Omnipotence claimed that the existence of God is incompatible with the existence of evil. And to argue his point, he needed to claim that a morally perfect being always eliminates as much evil as he can. However, as Plantinga said, if a being has a justifying reason for permitting some evil, then it's not necessarily true
that a morally perfect being always eliminates as much evil as he can. So, as a result of Plantinga's so-called free will defense, the philosophical community has come to sort of agreement that the logical problem of evil is too strong. Here is Mackey, the very person who wrote Evil and Omnipotence, responding to Plantinga. Since this defense is formally possible and its principle involves no real abandonment of our ordinary view of the opposition between good and evil, we can concede that the problem of evil does not, after all, show that the central doctrines of theism are logically inconsistent with one another. But whether this offers a real solution to the problem is another question. And then William Rowe. He says, some philosophers have contended that the existence of evil is logically inconsistent with the existence of the theistic God. No one, I think, has succeeded in establishing such an extravagant claim. Finally, William Alston, it is now acknowledged on almost all sides that the logical argument is bankrupt. So, we encountered the logical problem of evil, which says that God and evil are incompatible, logically speaking, but Plantinga says that if a being has a justifying reason for permitting some evil, then he doesn't have to prevent that evil. But that doesn't mean that there is no sort of problem of evil. In the next video, we'll cover the evidential problem of evil, which is a contemporary development on the problem of evil following Plantinga's sort of response to J.L. Mackey.